Hello, and welcome to this video on the U.S.S. Slater DE-766. Time during the Second World War, 1942. During the dark days of 1940, after the German conquest of France and prior to the U.S. involvement in World War II, England stood alone against the threat of Nazi world domination. An island nation, England was totally dependent upon ships to bring her the food and supplies she needed to defend herself. The Nazis used their U-boats to sink those ships in an attempt to strangle England by sea. The United States supplied England during World War II. Those supplies were delivered by ships crossing the Atlantic Ocean in convoys or protected groups. Part of the U.S. war effort was providing the British Navy with warships that could escort the convoys safely between the U.S. and England. In response to the need for a smaller, cheaper, faster to build convoy escort vessel, the British Admiralty sought design proposals for a new ship. The ensuing design was known as the British Destroyer Escort. Following the United States' entry into World War II, the U.S. Navy recognized the need for these ships and commissioned 44 of the EVARTS class vessels. These new ships carried 3-inch 50 caliber cannons that could shoot 6 miles to be used against the surface and aerial targets, as well as 40 millimeter and 20 millimeter guns for anti-aircraft defense. For anti-submarine warfare purposes, the vessels were fitted with depth charge racks and outboard-aimed depth projectors on the afterdeck, port, and starboard. These were known as hedgehog projectors. Plans were made to build and commission new destroyer escort vessels in volume. The overall design of the ships remained the same throughout their production run, but the configuration of the propulsion systems and armament changed as need and availability demanded. Each new configuration was given a new class name, that of the first vessel to be commissioned of the design. The Buckley class was the first, and the length of the ships grew from 289 feet to 306 feet. Primarily to house a new propulsion system, the steam-powered GE turbo-electric machinery, amidships the Buckley-class vessels were equipped with a triple-tube torpedo launcher. One of the 154 ships of the Buckley class were launched. The next variation was the Cannon-class vessel, and these were driven by 4 GM diesel generators providing power to twin electric motors. The U.S.S. Slater was one of those 72 Cannon-class vessels built. Next was the Edsel-class vessels, and 85 of those were built, and they were powered by 4 Banks Morse diesels, turning the twin 6-foot diameter screws through reverse gearing. The steam-powered General Electric turbo-electric machinery came back with the Rudder Row class vessels. The major distinction in this class of DEs was that they carried 2 5-inch 38 caliber guns in closed mounts, one fore and one aft, replacing the 3-inch 50 caliber guns in open mounts used on the earlier vessels. The John C. Butler was one of the next class of DEs, and of these 85 were built. While much of the same as the previous class, the John C. Butler class vessels were powered by Westinghouse geared turbines and were the fastest of the destroyer escorts. During the war, numerous DEs were given to our allies, France, England, and Brazil. The appearance of these excellent vessels in large numbers, along with air cover for convoys and electronic intelligence, were the key elements in defeating German U-boats. It was during the construction of the run of the Rudder Row class vessels that the destroyer escort design was modified to that of the Fast Attack Transport, or APD. 40 vessels were built as APDs and 22 as DEs. Conversions of the Buckley and Rudder Row class destroyer escorts to fast attack transports began in 1944. 95 DEs were converted to APDs by the end of the war. An APD typically carried 4 LCVP landing aircraft amidships and a derrick crane on the quarterdeck to load them with supplies. While destroyer escorts served in both Atlantic and Pacific theaters, the APDs were deployed delivering armed battalions of soldiers to beachheads on the Japanese-held Pacific Islands and served as bases of operations for the Navy frogmen of the underwater demolition teams. In 1944, in the Second World War, the ship was named in honor of the Frank O. Slater, a 22-year-old from Fife, Alabama, who was killed in action at his battle station aboard the U.S.S. San Francisco during an air raid off Guadalcanal in November 12, 1942. Frank was posthumously awarded the Navy Cross for gallantry in action. The U.S.S. Slater was launched on February 13, 1944, at the Tampa, Florida Shipbuilding Company, sponsored by Frank's mother, Mrs. James Slater, and it was commissioned on May 1st, 1944. Lieutenant Commander M.J. Blanc was in command in the shakedown cruise off Bermuda. Behind them, her crew of 216 officers and men sailed for Boston on the 25th of June to await assignment. From July through September, Slater acted as a target ship for training torpedo bomber fighter squadrons as a sonar school ship. With a brief stopover in New York City, the Slater made her way to Portland, Maine for training and returning to New York City. The Slater escorted 2 convoys to England during the remaining months of 1944. And from January to May 1945, she escorted 3 convoys to Wales, United Kingdom. Upon Germany's surrender, Slater was refitted with an additional anti-aircraft guns at the Brooklyn Naval Yard for Pacific Theater duty. On June 8, 1945, the Slater sailed for San Diego, California via Guantanamo Bay and the Panama Canal, arriving on the 6th of July. On the 9th of July, she set out for Pearl Harbor. Routed to the Philippine Islands, and one of the Marshall Islands, she joined a task unit at Manila on the 5th of September and escorted to Yokohama. She picked up a return convoy to Manila and continued escorting convoys in the Pacific, operating out of the Philippine Islands until the end of January 1946. After World War II and the post-Second World War era, following the end of the war, many of the surviving destroyer escorts and fast attack transports that were not scrapped or sunk as target vessels were given to Taiwan, South Korea, Mexico, Chile, Peru, Brazil, Uruguay, Greece, Holland, Italy, Thailand, and Japan under the Military Defense Assistance Program. Some were modified and updated and remained in service in the U.S. Navy and U.S. Coast Guard as frigates well into the Vietnam War era, while others were put into the mothball fleet following the war. Shortly after the arrival at San Pedro, U.S.S. Slater received orders routing her to Norfolk, Virginia for deactivation. She arrived on the 26th of March 1946 and was prepared for decommissioning. A month later, she sailed for Green Cove Springs in Florida, and in 1947, 3 years to the day after her launching in Tampa, she was towed to Charleston, South Carolina, and she was towed back to Green Cove Springs, where she was placed in reserve and out of commission. In 1951, the Slater was selected to be one of the 4 destroyer escorts transferred to the Greek government under the Military Defense Assistance Program with the Truman Doctrine, and brought out of mothballs. She was rechristened Eidos Eagle I by the Greeks and saw 40 years of service as a patrol and officer training vessel in the Hellenic Navy. It appeared in the movie Guns of Navarone, and she was retired from the Hellenic Navy in 1991. From the present to saving the U.S.S. Slater, in the early 1980s, the 15,000-member Destroyer Escort Sailors Association began searching for a suitable museum ship. Their search led to the Atos, the last DE in her original rig and available for restoration. Negotiations with the Greek government produced an agreement that transferred ownership of it directly to their association, and they raised $275,000 to secure the vessel and transport it to the U.S. It arrived in New York City at the end of the tow lines of the Ukrainian seagoing tug on the 27th of August, 1993, and she was moored at the U.S.S. Intrepid Sea and Airspace Museum in the Hudson River Pier 84 for the next 4 years. A contingent of volunteers began cleanup and restoration work. Her historical foundation formed out of Dessa and began raising funds for the restoration of Slater to her late World War II configuration to find her a permanent home. Their search was aided by the New York State Division of Military and Naval Affairs, whose military history branch coordinated the initial meetings between the DE Historical Foundation and the city of Albany. An agreement was sealed in July of 1977, and Sunday, October 26, 1977, she arrived in Albany. A new volunteer restoration began forming around Timothy Rizzuto, the ship's superintendent, to carry out the DEHF's vision of restoration, and a 5-year work plan was devised to return the vessel to her 1945 rig. Aboard Slater and docked nearly out of sight in the port of Albany, the tedious, painstaking work began slowly. The work was focused on the ship's exterior during the first season, and Slater was open to visitors in the spring of 1988. Of the 565 destroyer escorts that were launched during the war, Slater is the only surviving destroyer escort afloat in her World War II rig. The force behind Slater's restoration has been the men who sailed ships like her during and after World War II, and who continue to donate their time, money, and labor to keep their legacy alive. So here we can see a picture of, this is actually a poster on board the ship itself. It shows where she was in service in World War II from 1944 to 45, transferred to Greece in 1951. She returned to the U.S. in 1993 and arrived in Albany in 1997. You can see the before and after pictures of the hedgehog projectors, the Combat Information Center, and the depth charge ruling rack. This is a map of the ship. sort of a cutaway, top-down cutaway view of all the various decks on the ship. And you can see some of her statistics. She was 306 feet long, 36 feet wide, 90 feet tall. She has 4 diesel engines, electric drive, 2 propellers with a range of 10,800 nautical miles at 12 knots, and a top speed of 21 knots with 201 enlisted men and 15 officers for a total crew of 216 men with a paint scheme of Measure 32 3D and dazzle camouflage. Here you can see a chart of the number of U-boats that sank early in the war. Between 1939 to 1942, the U-boats just totally dominated the Atlantic, sinking many hundreds and nearly 2,000 ships. And eventually, what turned the tide of the war, starting in 1942 and on through 1945, many U-boats were, more U-boats were destroyed. A total number of U-boats commissioned was 1,154, and 765 were lost, so about 65% of the fleet. Here we see the kitchen area. They had 3 cooks on board. Lunch was the most important meal of the day, as everyone partook. They had a high-tech agitation potato peeler, you can see in the corner there, and a tour of duty was 3 weeks. They carried provisions to feed 216 people for that period of time. Here's a picture of a hedgehog, or known as an anti-submarine projector, and it was capable. It's a forward-throwing anti-submarine weapon that was used to propel 24 spigot mortars ahead of the ship when attacking a U-boat. It was deployed on the Slater and DE class ships, and the mortar projectiles employed contact fuses rather than timed or bathymetric or depth fuses, and detonation occurred directly against the hard surface, such as the hull of a submarine, making it more deadly than depth charges, which relied purely on damage caused by hydrostatic shock waves. So here we see a view of the forward quarters and kitchen, and we see a view of the tables and the part of the hall going into the forward cruise berthing. Forward of the mess decks is the forward cruise berthing compartment. This compartment contained bunks for the crew's enlisted sailors. The sailors slept here 3 high. Each man got a small bunk locker below it, to which they could stow all their belongings. Petty officers got the stand-up lockers, and living in these spaces, men had to get along in extremely crowded environments. In general, the ship was when the ship was underway at night, 1/3 of the crew was on watch, leaving 2/3 asleep in the compartment. The watch changed at midnight and 4 a.m., and the crew got very adept at changing clothes quietly in the dark so as not to wake their shipmates. And consideration for others was really important in making such a living situation bearable. Red light was provided as the only illumination at night so as not to interfere with the soldiers' night vision. And the men forward had to contend with the pitching motion of the ship. And there were 3 other berthing compartments aft, and those men felt less pounding but had to contend with the vibration of the ship's screws. Next, we head to the captain's. Next we head to this is the captain's cabin and ship's office. So on the port side of the O1 level forward is the captain's cabin. This was the largest and best cabin on the ship. It featured a private bathroom complete with sink, shower, and commode. The stateroom itself featured a single bunk, desk, and file cabinet and large hanging locker for the captain's uniforms. The captain of a DE was usually a reserve lieutenant commander or senior lieutenant when operating as the flagship of a 6-ship escort division and division commander, and would take over the captain's cabin, leaving the captain to bump the executive officer from his bunk, creating a minor rearrangement in officer berthing assignments. The ship's office was located opposite the captain's cabin, and the ship clerical staff or yeomen handled the routine paperwork essential to shipboard operation and personnel matters. This is the bridge and pilot house. The pilot house is the control center of the Slater. The flying bridge is the open area above the pilot house. And on the bridge, the officer of the deck, or OOD, controlled the ship by issuing orders to men in the pilot house, engine rooms, and control stations. Communication was accomplished by enlisted men with sound-powered telephones, the 221 MC intercom unit, or by voice tubes. The captain's chairs are located in each bridge wing, and during emergencies or battle stations, the captain would take direct control of the ship. The World War II bridge had no room to give a clear view of the sky during air attacks. It was an uncomfortable place in foul weather. In the pilot house, the ship was steered by the helmsman, who kept the ship on course by watching the gyro compass repeater. A magnetic compass was in the pinnacle for use in emergencies, and the lee helmsman sent orders to the engine rooms by means of the mechanical engine order telegraph. Other equipment located in the pilot house includes the chart table, control panels for the ship's navigation lights, alarm, radar repeaters, and communications equipment. 9 men manned the bridge and pilot house during normal conditions. Here's the engineer's office, located just after the amidships passageway on the starboard side of the log room or engineer's department office. Here, the chief engineer's men maintained all records necessary to keep the ship's diesel-electric power plant operating. The engineer's yeomen took care of all their logbooks, bell books, and machinery operating records. This office also served as the library for all the blueprints and technical manuals that came up with the ship when she was delivered to the Navy for her builders. Every piece of equipment aboard the ship, including the hull itself, has blueprints, operating instructions, and parts books to help the crew understand and care for the ship and all our equipment. Technical information for all the ship's systems, except for the ordnance equipment, would be maintained here in the log room. The signal bridge was the center for visual sights to other ships in sailing with the Slater, and signals originated with the captain or officer of the deck and were relayed to signalmen to other ships. Lookouts were constantly on alert for other ships that might be signaling, and these signals were relayed in one of 3 ways. In semaphore, a signalman holding 2 flags on a high platform and extending his arms in different positions that represented letters of the alphabet. This is the most rapid way of communication and well suited to plain language. However, it was only usable in daylight. Another daylight signaling system was flag hoists, colored flags raised to the yard arm on the ship's halyards. Each flag represented a letter, number, or tactical term. Codebooks were used to encipher messages because the naval ships had special codes that were secret. Flags were hung alphabetically in the large canvas covering flag bags, and when making up a message, the signalman would clip flags together to make the message and hoist the signal. Surrounding ships would hoist the answering pennant, and when the message was read and understood, lastly, there were also day or night systems, and seen here a flashing light, which could be used to send signals via Morse code with these 12 and 24-inch signal lamps. This was a rapid way of communicating, but it was rarely used at night for fear of the light would be revealing one's position to the enemy. And infrared hooded lenses were used to mask the bright lights of the signal to limit their visibility. Here we see the 20mm guns. The 20mm guns were the smallest anti-aircraft guns carried aboard the Slater. As heavy machine guns, they could fire 460 rounds per minute per barrel with an approximate range of 1 mile. Each gun was manned by a crew of 4 men, a gunner, a sight setter, and 1 loader per barrel. The gun was originally designed in Switzerland by the Orlik company, hence the metric designation. Ammunition was held in 60-round drum magazines that fit on top of the breeches. After long periods of firing, about 240 rounds, the barrel had to be changed by the loaders, who wore asbestos gloves. The hot barrels are switched with spare barrels stored in cooling tanks and welded alongside the guns. The magazines were stored in lockers behind the gun mounts, and when first placed in service in 1942, these guns were mounted singly and were aimed by open ring sights. After 1942, the lead computing stabilized Mark 14 gun sight was mounted on these guns for better accuracy. In 1945, the twin mount became common. On VJ Day in 1945, Slater carried 10 single 20mm guns, 4 forward on the bridge and 4 midstrips on the 01 level, and 2 on the fantail. The twin mounts seen today were installed after the war ended. These guns were not big enough to be effective against kamikazes. Here we see the ship's store price list. So people could buy goods directly from the ship's store, and you see the price conversion and cost for each of those things. So here we see the depth charges. The depth charge projector Mark 6 Mod 1, or commonly called the K gun, was used to launch a 300-pound cylindrical depth charge, or the 200-pound teardrop charge. The K guns consisted of a smooth bore barrel attached to an expansion chamber fitted with a breech mechanism. The breech plugs an interrupted screw type housing a firing mechanism which provides for local percussion, firing by lanyard or electrical firing, controlling from the bridge. The projector is permanently secured to the ship and cannot be trained or elevated, and variations in range are obtained by altering the weight of the impulse charges, which are assembled in 3-inch cases similar to those used for torpedo impulse charges. 3 standard weights of spherohexagonal black powder charges were used to obtain ranges of 50, 75, and 120 yards. And the depth charge is launched by an arbor attached to it, and the action of the propellant gas being against the base of the arbor. The arbor used with a cylindrical depth charge remains attached to the charge after firing, whereas that used with a teardrop charge detaches after firing, permitting it to take advantage of the streamlined design. Here we see the fantail, and the fantail is the rear or aft deck of the ship, and below the fantail are 2 powerful 6-foot propellers that propel the ship, and the large twin rudders used to steer the Slater. Spotted around this deck are ventilators and bits and chocks used to tie up the stern lines. The small hatch or scuttle leads to the steering engine room, which houses a large hydraulic ram, which move the rudders in response to steering signals. The large hatch leads to a crew berthing compartment or bunk room, which held 60 men. The most prominent feature of the fantail was the depth charge rack, and 2 racks are located in the fantail. Also very important was the secondary conning station, which is located just forward of the 40mm guns. It served as an emergency control station if the bridge was knocked out. The station was equipped with a magnetic compass and sound-powered telephones that connected the men with a steering engine room and the main propulsion systems. This was an important place because enemy ships and aircraft often aimed at the ship's bridge and pilot house, so a backup control system was vital to a warship. The purpose of the compensating balls on either side of the magnetic compass was to adjust the compass, counteracting the magnetic pull of the steel ship. The binnacle hood was a shield designed to protect the compass from the elements. The interior was painted white in order to reflect light and improve compass visibility. And here is the engine parts room, where you can see that they had all sorts of parts and hardware in order to be able to work and repair the ship. So that was my tour of the Slater, and it should be noted that there are a couple of tours, a shorter and a longer tour, and it was really an enjoyable experience to to take a tour of the Slater, and I hope you get a chance as well to go on board and check out an important piece of the U.S. naval history. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and check out some of my other tour videos, and have a great day.